And as the moderator for this panel discussion, I would like to welcome Janina Henning. She's the Community Manager for Sustainability of the Industrie 4.0 platform, which is the largest Industry 4.0 network worldwide. And they're working on linking production and sustainability. Janina, welcome to the conference.
Thanks a lot, Hannes, and a very warm welcome and good morning from my side.
Thank you.
Thanks all of yes.
Just a quick comment for our participants online. For the panel discussions, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat as always, and they will be answered later on during the session. Now, Janina, the stage is yours.
Very important remark. Thanks again for that, and let's get started. You have heard a lot about the potentials that the digitization might have for the industrial sector. What we would like to do now with you is to have a deep dive and actually build the bridges that Dirk Messner has already mentioned and bring together the perspective of science, but also of businesses, and look at where they stand today and where they would like to go in the future. This panel discussion is organized by the German Plattform Industrie 4.0. As you've heard, it's the largest network of Industry 4.0 stakeholders, bringing together politicians, businesses, unions, trade associations, and all these relevant to actually build the framework of the digital production of the future. And in this panel discussion, we have gathered experts that actually bring together the science perspective, but also the business perspective. So let me introduce you to our expert today. You have already got to know Dirk Messner and have learned about his missing links and his ideas in his keynote. So welcome, Mr. Messner, to this talk once again. I'm not going to introduce you in detail, but because everyone has heard you already. I'd also like to welcome Professor Frank Piller. He is the co-director of the Institute of Technology and Innovation Management at the Aachen University. So good morning, Mr. Piller. Nice to have you here. I'd like to welcome Dr. Carsten Polenz. He is the vice president at the Sherpa office at SAP and a very well-known expert on various aspects of sustainability. You'll hear of him in a couple of minutes. Good morning, Carsten. Then we are joined by Lisa Alexandra Unkelhäuser. She is senior partner at Bosch Climate Solutions GmbH, which is a quite interesting endeavor that the Robert Bosch company has started. We will hear about that in a couple of minutes as well. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
And also good morning to Professor Schebeck. She is chair of the Material Flow Management and Resource Economy at the TU Darmstadt. And she will give us some insights on resource efficiency, which is her focus point in this discussion.
Good morning.
And last but not least, another voice from the company side, Dr. Johannes van der Beek. He is in research and development at the Mosca GmbH, which is the SME, you can say, in the south of Germany. We will learn about their packaging industry also in this talk. It's great to have you all here, and I suggest we get started with the discussion. And I'd like to start with you, Carsten, looking into or giving us an overview of the potentials that actually are there between the digital technology industry and sustainable development. You have been part of the Platform Industry 4.0, have managed the task force sustainability there. You're also a member of the Circularity Initiative in Germany. So you should have this overview and might share it with us now.
Yeah, thanks, Janina. I'd like to set this, or my actual job today is to set the stage. So if I look at these three things, so my task was, what is the interplay and the potential and the vision for sustainability, industry, and digitalization? So therefore, if we look at these 3 points, first of all, sustainability. I think sustainability has been around as a topic. The first thing I remember was the Rio conference in 1992. So for almost 30 years, it's been, let's say, on the top of the schedule and of the agenda. But nevertheless, it had, its up and downs. For me, one of the most important things that happened in this year is the ruling of the Supreme Court in Germany that actually put a force on politics and on society overall to take into account the future perspectives of future generations into today's decisions. I think we haven't really explored that ultimately and in the long run what that means, but nevertheless that sets the stage from an environmental and from a governance perspective. If I look at the word industry, being growing up in one of the most industrialized areas in Germany, and we're amongst coal pits, etc., and blackened houses because of the dust and the smoke. There is another aspect I was thinking about sustainability. If you look back to the 70s and 60s, that was a booming region. And then it went through at the end of the 80s and the 90s and after the turn of the century through a rather desperate situation. And still it has some of the highest unemployment rates in Germany. So therefore, there is, and one can argue that in those areas, taking into account the future was not really an issue in the 60s and 70s. It was all about work. But nevertheless, if you miss a switch, if you miss a transformation, you'll suffer from it for quite some time. And it needs significant effort to get out of this. So the third point, digitalization. Is digital technology the holy grail? We've talked about digital technologies over the last 1.5 years in a completely different way than before. And even this conference without digital technology couldn't have prepared in a way as it is today. So looking forward, I think there are 3 paths which we discussed in the task force for industry within the overall framework of the digitization of industry. The first one is we need to drastically reduce the consumption of any raw materials, resources, by increasing efficiency, by reducing the consumption, whatever it takes. The second path is we need to shift, and Professor Messner did talk about this, from mass products to transparent service offers. And the third one is then...
Yes, but I don't know what I can do on it. It's connected by an...
Okay. So the third one is if we need to cross boundaries. We need to cross boundaries between the different stakeholders, between different companies in a supply chain. So what is the potential and what is the vision? I think ultimately from an industrial perspective, what we need to strive for is we need to optimize the hardware usage over its entire life cycle. And today we already try to optimize it, but it's mostly optimizing the efficiency of a production line and the scalability of this. But we need to take into account different measures, different dimensions from a sustainability perspective. How do we go about this potentially? I think there is, for me, the central idea is the extension of that, what we call a digital twin, and what has been in the community, in the industrial community for quite some time, to enhance it to what I call green twin. So not just incorporate, go way beyond the digital passport, way beyond a green digital passport, but to include all the data you need over the entire life cycle, because that data is then the basis for new algorithms. Today's algorithms and how you control companies and how you manage companies exclude most of the fact any sustainability measures. There are few first ideas, there are few first products getting out, but I think that needs a complete revamp if we go from linear to circular. So from a digital perspective, there needs to be done quite some research and then implementation. On top of this means that we need to connect overall. We need to connect and optimize across these networks, across these circular flows. And ultimately, there's then the challenge: what do we do about the IT? We need to green the IT and the usage of IT and the development and planning of IT. So finally, coming to the levels. First of all, tracing end-to-end will be a key lever in order to get transparency on what is the research consumption in order to reduce it. The second one is we need to have products to circularity. So it's no longer build and dump, but it's getting it back into the circular flow, or never leave it circular flow. And that implies the question of business models. So we need to create business models which are designed for sustainability. At the heart of this, from my perspective, is how do we go about data? How do we share data? And what role will data play in this future economy and this future industry? Because you need that in order to organize the entire system. So with these three levers, I'd like to give back to Janina. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And before we dive into these three paths that show the way to the future, I'd like to stay on this meta level for a second and have a look at that together with Professor Messner. Carsten, you've mentioned already that this is a transformation going back 30 years from now, and the sustainability movement is a quite old one. So now it comes together with digitization within the industrial sector. And is there anything that you, Professor Messner, have observed in the last years that might help the industrial sector, like any success factors or anything within this transformation that they can find as orientation to actually speed up and make this a successful endeavor?
Yeah, thank you very much, Janina. I mean, I would highlight 2 points. I agree with what Carsten has been arguing about. Carsten, your first point was that we need a shift in perspective, right? And we need a shift in perspective because with technologies, also with artificial intelligence and digital tools, we also could, of course, optimize unsustainable growth patterns. And in many parts of the economy and the global economy, we are still doing this. As Carsten mentioned, we are at the beginning of linking these new innovation dynamics with sustainability frameworks actually now. And we are taking seriously the emission issue, so going down to zero emission within the next 20 to 25 years, or really moving towards circularity. This is something which is not comprehensively being implemented. We are starting now to do so. And therefore, these shifts in perspective, which Carsten mentioned, is something which I would highlight. And shift in perspective is needed on the business level, because we talked about companies developing new business concepts. It is needed in the research arena, because we need to bring people together and research communities together, which has not been working closely together during the last decades. And I think that the effort is comparable now. If we think about a community of sustainability and AI and digital researchers, a joint community, this is comparable with the emergence of the sustainability science, which we have today, because at the beginning, natural scientists and economists and social scientists did not talk together about environmental issues, sustainability issues, planetary threats. No, we have been learning during the last 30 years in the field of sustainability research to build this new community. And now we need to build a new community around digitalization, artificial intelligence, these kind of innovation rates on the one hand side and sustainability challenges on the other hand side. The second point, which I wanted to emphasize, which also is echoing, if I understood Carsten right, what Carsten already said. And Carsten, what you said is that technological progress is very important, but we need to combine technological progress with governance innovations and social innovations. Carsten, you spoke about consumption. You spoke about even reducing consumption. No? And this is very important because, I mean, if I talk to people, people are fascinated if you gave them technological solutions to difficult questions. And the major feeling is that this is not impacting me. And I think we need to make very clear that technological fixes don't work if they would not be combined with social innovations and governance innovations. And therefore, this is coming back to the actor constellations we need. We need cooperation and dialogues between industry, the policy arena, and researchers to find integrated good solutions which bring technology, social innovations, and governance innovations together. Thank you, Janina.
Thanks a lot. Well, let's look at that more in detail and let's dive into the first path that Carsten has already mentioned, reducing resources and having efficient resource and material use within the industrial sector. For this, I'd like to pose a question to Professor Schebeck. You are focusing on resource efficiency and have made a lot of studies on that. Can you give us some findings out of these studies where companies stand with regard to resource efficiency and what they still need to do in the future?
Yes, maybe starting with the finding from these studies is that at the moment, and looking in a short to medium term perspective, the main and the unique contribution of Industry 4.0 or digitalization in general is that first it makes available data and specific data on specific manufacturing processes and specific issues or parts of an organization. And this basically has been a main obstacle in the past, a main obstacle notably for small and medium companies. And companies are now starting off, they're getting data and they are confronted also to driving or to drawing information as to resource efficiency from these data. And this is the first challenge. How do they get information not only on the consumption on electricity, on the consumption of materials, but also to the related carbon footprint? How do they relate this information to the supply chain and possible changes upstream and downstream? So this is what's happening at the moment. And as I said, this is a unique chance because this obstacle of lacking availability, knowing what specifically is happening in one process, in one supply chain, in one production line, this has hampered resource efficiency in the past. However, at the same time, we have to take into account, and this has been said also in the former contributions, that resource efficiency is not done as a standalone solution by digitalization. If we look what measures are necessary for resource efficiency, it's on these real-world measures like waste minimization, like avoidance of losses, like energy efficiency we know about. And this means, again, bringing together these two worlds, bringing together the worlds of digitalization and resource efficiency. And this has not yet happened at any place. Many progress has been made during the last years. We did a study on this 3 years ago, and we saw that resource efficiency was not at the focus of digitalization in those companies we investigated. But I think many things have evolved since then, and this has been acknowledged as a main issue, bringing these communities together. But still, it is a major challenge. And then looking at the long-term perspective, which is clearly a life cycle perspective, things, of course, get more complex, and here it is not the scope of one company as its own, but the interaction of stakeholders in the supply chain, but also stakeholders outside of the supply chain, which also contribute to resource efficiency, to resource consumption, to the framework, and also looking at the changes that will take place on the societal level, on the level of the full economy, as to new business models, as to new virtual services. This is a thing which is not yet understood as to the real consequences, but also as to the question, how do we incorporate this into a life cycle assessment? And how do we get the information as to the contribution to climate neutrality, as to the contribution to other sustainability issues, to other natural resources, because we not only talk on climate change, but also other environmental problems related to resource consumption. How do we evaluate this? How do we have a clear connection between measures on the level of companies, on the level of organization, and the contribution to the societal goals we have? And this is another gap which I see, the connection between micro and macro level, in order to relate small changes to the great goals we have, or to sustainability in general.
Yes, thanks a lot. Let's bring the company perspective in here, especially with the aspect to resource efficiency. I have invited Mr. van der Beek from Mosca. This is a packaging company, and packaging is definitely industrial sector using resources and being critical about resource efficiency. What does your company do with regard to that? Do you already use data to show your energy efficiency? Do you track your resources and your material? Where do you stand with that?
Yeah. Mosca, first of all, is a system supplier for equipment and consumable for strapping process. Strapping is a minimal material packaging process for high automated processes in several industries. Besides the topics we have around our machinery and equipment, that we go to less energy consumption and all the things around digitalization, I want to go deeper on the topic of the consumables, the strapping material that is extruded plastics. We are doing that over years, and what we are doing still in Germany, I think that's close to Industry 4.0. We built up a production site in the year 2009 and started directly by using recycled material out of a circular economy. We are producing PET straps. They're out of bottle flakes, so we are using the recycling circle completely for that material. We get that in a quantity and a quality and to a price which is possible to place on markets. So our customers use that material under our label Get Inside. That's our green sustainable label, where you get machines with sustainable technologies in combination with consumable material, which is out of the recycling sector. On the other hand, we have PP material, where we are increasing the recycling rate, but there we have the challenge that we don't get the quantity and the quality we need for that. So that's something that the infrastructures and ecosystems are not ready to bring us to the position to bring the products to market. At the end, I will mention our special product, a PLA. That's a completely industrial compostable strap. There Mosca has an international patent, and but that is something without a circular economic. I think we have that for over 10 years, but there we see that innovation don't touch the market because the pricing and topics like that are not ready to use, but we are in innovating things like that. At the end, our thoughts around that topic is the consumable is one of the biggest point in the sustainable aspect of the packaging process. So we have, besides the equipment and all things around that, figure out on the systems efforts. So reducing the material use for the packaging process bring us to a more sustainable solution. And when we can bring the material after the user's edge packaging solution back to the recycling circle, then we really have a circular economy and can bring down the impact of our technologies. So our perspective is reducing the material inside our straps. That brings us to a point that we are reducing the limits, or we are going closer to the technical limits in production of the strap and in our strapping process in our machinery. So to do that, we need all things we know from Industry 4.0, example, adaptive controls and things like that, that we can run that on our side and on the side of our customers with the same performance they know up to now. So that's a short journey around what we are doing in context of circular economy and how that fits to Industry 4.0 from our perspective.
Do you feel that you lose competitiveness when you start setting up circular systems or introducing new materials that might be more resource efficient?
No, we see that our customers are thinking about that things years or for decades, and they are asking for solutions like that. And we see clear that sustainability and ecological things have to fit to each other, and then we have a solution which is better than all other solutions. So it is nothing which you have to pay extra for. We need solution which fits to the market needs, and then a sustainable solution will win all competitions. That's our view on it, and I think we are successful because we are driving that things over decades.
That's good to hear. On the other side, you said that if it's too expensive for the market, they won't buy it. So I guess you have to bring together the economic and the ecological perspective here, right?
Yes, sure. B2B business works a little bit different to B2C business, and that we need to have in mind even for the sites in Germany. And we are energy consuming and things like that. So that's a big topic. We are thinking a lot about that so that we can, have the workforce in Germany still and the production sites.
Okay, thanks again. I'd like to put another focus that we have mentioned, or actually all of you have mentioned before, the question of data and gathering data throughout the whole process. One of the most practical uses of gathering data is the CO2 footprint. And companies are starting to set their CO2 footprint to make it transparent, to actually use it and show it publicly. So you, Lisa, are supporting companies in that and actually helping them to get their CO2 footprint. So you work with your experiences at Robert Bosch, who has announced to become CO2 neutral, I think in 2020, and they have actually made it. So this is a success so far. But when you address companies now, do they see this as a relevant topic? And what is their motivation to actually start with this?
Yes, I think, first of all, we are producing carbon neutral. So that means our scope 1 and 2 emissions are down to 0. And now we work on our supply chain carbon footprint, which is an even bigger challenge. And here also comes in the relevance for the small, medium, mid-market industrial businesses, because if the automotive industry works on its carbon neutrality concept, and they all announced now dates by when they want to be carbon neutral and they want to tackle that climate action, that means they need their supply chain. So as long as you as an industrial company are part of that industrial supply chain, you need to work now on that journey as well. Otherwise, you no longer will be relevant into that supply chain. And here we see that the motivation is changing from no longer it's a nice to have thing to work on a climate concept or on a neutrality concept, but this will be a competitive advantage, and that will bring really something important if you want to stay relevant in the automotive industry in the future. And we also see that if the big OEM starts, that drops down the entire supply chain, and more we have that also in the more wider ecosystem. And we see here that if the motivation gets spreaded, it is also something that the one or the other motivates each other. And I think if you saw the articles around the automotive fair the last day, I read an article about the big keynotes of the automotive industry seemed like a Greenpeace event. I'm quite sure Greenpeace wouldn't agree with that, but nevertheless, you see that sustainability and carbon neutrality becomes such a big topic. And that is, for example, why we, as one of the key automotive suppliers, also make that very precise with our key suppliers, stating that we expect from them a certain commitment. We, for example, use the Carbon Disclosure Project, where companies can disclose their efforts. They become transparent. They be transparent in terms of how big is their footprint, how are they working in, how they're measuring the footprint, what kind of action they put in to reduce their emissions. And that is then tracked on a yearly basis. And here we can see, or we need to see progress. And that CDP score becomes part of our procurement process. And I think that is one of the key things where we no longer discuss whether this topic could be relevant or not, but where everybody notices that this topic is already a competitive advantage in the automotive industry and the entire supply chain. That is the first thing why this is relevant. And the second thing is something else. And here we talked a lot about like resource efficiency. We look at energy efficiency. One of the key levers how we worked on our carbon neutrality concept for our almost 300 production facilities was energy efficiency, because reducing CO2 also means saving energy, means saving cost. And here for sure nobody disagrees that this is important for any kind of factory. So reducing cost also means you have money to invest in further innovation and to see how you can improve processes, how you can improve material to further reduce by the end emissions. And here we also very often see that this is really like a business case. We gather all that projects around the globe, and then we look at those energy efficiency projects from the facilities. We even reward the best projects, which motivates highly the employees to get a project in that table. And then we look at those projects. How much energy do we save? How much emissions do we save? But also how big is the investment and how long is the payback period? And then we rank those projects. And here we really see that there is a business case. And here we also motivate highly like industrial mid-market companies. Yes, everybody is telling us all the time, if I talk to a production facility manager or a head of production, we do energy efficiency as long as I'm in the job. And that might be absolutely 100% true. But I always try to say, even the world record holder in swimming still has a coach. And that coach brings in ideas, it brings in feedback, it pushes the athlete, for example. And that is exactly what we now try to do with the companies we are working with. We try to push them further in energy efficiency. We try to give them new perspective, innovative ideas, whatever makes it possible to pull out even more potential from the production facilities. And I think that is something very important, and I would highly recommend to everybody.
Okay, and let me ask one more question on that. When you consult small and medium enterprises, do you see that they are ready to gather all the data that is needed for that, or is there still a huge gap there?
Yeah, to be honest, that's highly depending. Sometimes they started through the Industry 4.0 initiatives, if we do have some, or through some standardized norms. For example, some implemented an ISO norm, so they already use some kind of energy management platform system. We, for example, worked the last years in Bosch to connect all factories worldwide on the same level in our energy management platform, and some do already have that. I would say 50%, and the other 50% do have very local and not standardized initiatives for their production facilities. And here we start very often data, and gathering those data, then try to analyze those data and standardize those data, and also bring in the idea that this already brings in a lot of value, because you can do a lot of different things, not only reducing emissions, but also optimizing the entire factory based on that data gathering platforms.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lisa. I'd like to have a look at the second path that we have mentioned, the change of business models. And that, is coming right after using technology to be more efficient. There's a transformation that businesses think of, okay, maybe we have to change the business model or can change business models. I refer to Professor Frank-Piller. He is part of a working group on digital business models in the Plattform Industrie 4.0, and they have been working out a thesis paper and have looked into the effects these digital business model might have on sustainability. Is there any points you'd like to share with us?
Well, perhaps on addition, I really like what I just heard from Bosch, but our traditional thinking is we have the current business models and we make them more efficient, and this will save the world. And our belief is not. Perhaps it's even doing a negative effect, as if we just make the current business models more efficient, perhaps we don't get the changes we need. So our approach, and we just published a thesis paper, which will short advertisement be announced on 16th of September in a webinar, with 10 theses on business models. And the idea is that perhaps you really have to rethink the business models on addition to making existing business models more resource efficient. And at this point, what is a business model? Well, it has two elements: value creation and value capture. And we previously heard a lot about value creation. If we talk about AI, machine learning, visibility, transparency, it's very much on the recycling and so on, on the creation part. But let's look on value capture, as perhaps, and as Germans, we are not so good in this. We are very good in, creation and innovation. But value capture means, how do we really capture the value? How do we share the value we have here? And we probably need perhaps some profound changes in our way of thinking. One of the holy grails for the business school professor in the past was that we have business models, that have a lock-in effect, that really connect players around a platform orchestrator that is using the data to really have lock-in effects. Well, if we really would like to have sustainability, we have to go beyond business models based on a lock-in effect and exclusivity of a network, but really about what has been said before, sharing of data and openness of data. That demands a very, very new way of thinking. If we say we use artificial intelligence, machine learning to improve the utilization of industrial assets, what I learned from my colleague Günther Schuh, big machine tool professor in Aachen, is that the average machine tool in Germany, in very, very well-managed factories, is just utilized 34%. So that could bring, perhaps we can bring it to 100% utilization of these resources, which would be resource efficiency, but we don't want to produce 3 times more goods. So we need just a third of the machine tools we have today. And how we share this value that we still not only have just a third of companies. And that would be my challenge to Bosch. We would have more time. I really would like to learn from Lisa what she just said, that how are you not just pushing your suppliers towards more suppliers, but how you are also sharing the value created in Bosch with your supply chain, that they are able to do this, and how you see value capture, not just on individual company levels, but really on the entire value chain. And I think this is a debate we are just starting. And therefore, from a business model perspective, I would say this emphasis purely on resource efficiency may lead us a little bit in a trap in past dependency of old business models, but we really propose we have to really rethink the existing business models we have today.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Piller, for sharing that with us. Looking at the time, I'd like to have a last round with you and take up one aspect that Dirk Messner mentioned, that we need social innovations, technology innovations, and a government framework. I guess there's also a research gap that need to be closed in the near future. First of all, we have a question from the audience to you, Dirk. What do you mean by social innovations, and can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, two simple examples. A social innovation is bringing the level of consumption down. I mean, this is what Mr. Piller just said. Our aim is not only to improve efficiencies of material flows, but at the end of the day, we need to bring the flow of material flows really down. And social innovation is less consumption. A social innovation is from owning, this is the second example, to using. So if we would not need then 40 to 50 million cars, in a sharing economy, selling mobility as a service, we might use only 10 million cars. So this is what social innovations are about. But maybe, Janina, let me make a further argument, if you allow me to do so, for this last round. I think actually, listening to what we have been discussing here, I think we are in a transition period, because I agree with Mr. Piller. You talked about the new business models, not only thinking about incremental changes and efficiencies, you thought about new business concepts. And listening then to Bosch and to Mosca, I think that we are in between of these two processes at the same time, because Lisa, when you talked about your concept at Bosch, carbon neutrality, Mr. Piller, carbon neutrality is not only incremental. Carbon neutrality is from being a bit more efficient in terms of energy efficiency, going to zero emissions. In the field of resource management and circular economy, we are still not at this stage, I think. We are in this field of circular economy dynamics. We are still in the field of incremental changes and far away from what we needed to get. Again, at the end here of our discussion, two examples. I mean, I mentioned this already. During the last 30 years, we have a stagnation when it comes to the recycled materials which are going into the product process again. 12 to 15% in Europe. After 30 years of discussing concepts of circularity, stagnation in this regard, 12 to 15%, far too low, obviously. I'm coming from another conference which we had yesterday with Chinese colleagues. We talked about buildings. And you know that 50% of our material flows and resource flows are related to buildings and cities, 50%. The recycle indicators in this sector are depressing. I mean, if you look at cement or concrete, in Germany, 0.2% of the used material, concrete, cement, is recycled, 0.2%. And this shows us that we are still in the phase of learning and moving into a direction in which we are already in the field of climate protection, I think, because the climate neutrality concept and zero emission concept, this goes beyond incremental changes and energy efficiencies. In the circularity field, we need to make this leapfrogging process still. And here I agree, I think, with Mr. Piller.
So let me put that into a question to all of you. Which is the one innovation you would like to drive forward, or you can drive forward, or which is the one research project you think would be the most valuable from your perspective right now in this last round? I'm going to start with you, Carsten, once again. What is the one innovation you would like to see?
Basically, for me, it's social innovation. I think if you change consuming patterns from the end consumer down to the OEMs or first-tier suppliers of any industry, you need to change the habits. Otherwise, you won't succeed. But if you succeed in changing the habits, then the technology innovation will follow.
Thanks for this. And I hand over to Lisa. Which is the one innovation you think would be most useful?
I think a lot of technological innovation around carbon capturing, which is currently going on, still very beginning, but very much research is going on and everything around carbon capturing. Otherwise, we will not tackle this challenge. So that is from a technical perspective. From a more other topic innovation side, I mean, we are the best example. A sustainable consulting business within an automotive supplier is the perfect example of being brave enough to start something new, to start a new business model. And I will just highly encourage everybody to think about what kind of business model can be sustainable in the future for their current company.
Professor Schebeck, do you agree with that? Do you have your innovation or research project for the future already in mind?
Yes, from our perspective, we are in the field of methodology of assessment. Of course, we have many assessment tools, but what we do see, and what I mentioned before, is the gap between the perspective of the stakeholders, of the micro perspective, of those who in companies or organizations or communities have to take concrete action, and the macro perspective. What does that contribute to goals on the societal level, be it societal change, be it more technological oriented goals, or be it planetary boundaries for different environmental issues. And so we do have to make a clearer connection between the perspective doing a concrete action and what does it contribute and how does it relate to that what we see on the top-down perspective. And that would be more urgent the more we talk on societal change, the more we talk on new business models and not only incremental improvement of resource efficiency.
Thanks a lot. Mr. van der Beek, what does Mosca have in its innovative background? What is your innovation you'd like to push forward?
Not only alone, but I like the idea of the green twin and the product passport. And what I see is we need a standardization for the calculation of the key figures, like CO2 footprint, that we get something like that from our suppliers to bring it to our customers with our equipment. And even in the process that we can say on the packaged material of our customers, we have that CO2 footprint. That's my vision I have in mind, that we can share that information over company borders, over ERP systems, over all ideas we have around digitalization, that we get that label a value. And I think that's a social impact that we need. The need for labels like that, that we can work in the companies on it to get the information. But often we are depending on our suppliers and we don't get the information in the quality we need it often for information like that. But my idea from digitalization on a longer term is that we can bring that information to our customers and that we can show out in a way our competitors do in the same way, that our technologies and solutions are better in that attitude.
Professor Piller, you already mentioned business models as the innovation you're looking into. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, we know, and this is perhaps the reason of existence of management professors, that existing companies are very bad in changing their business model. They really need a deep, deep crisis to do so. And I think with regard to sustainability as humankind, we can't afford that we go even deeper into the crisis that companies act. I think what we truly need is smart regulatory measures. So my demand for innovation will be really on the political agenda on smart, however we define it, really inform regulatory measures that companies need to really the ability need to act and change the existing business models and not wait until really the flood is under their skin and then they do it out of their own account.
Thanks a lot. And thanks all of you for joining this discussion, for showing that there is still a lot to do, still a lot that needs to be innovated, needs to be transformed, and we need to push that forward. So we wanted to build the bridge today, and I think we have done that with this discussion as an initiation to go forward. We invite anyone interested to address the Platform Industry 4.0 in case you are interested in further information and keeping this discussion going. We invite you to our web seminar on digital business models and sustainability on September 16th. And with that, I'd like to close and once again, thank you all for joining this discussion today.